Sure, it might not have been the first, but there's no way anyone can deny the impact the GTA games had on the world of 12-year-olds claiming to have seen Mothman in a fucking video game. There are quite literally hundreds of reasons for that, which I don't intend on getting into, but I think the most important one has to just be the simple fact that they're all games made entirely around letting you pick a direction and there just being a bunch of shit in your way. Because naturally, one effect open world sandboxes always have, especially if they're just really well designed and populated, is that more responsibility is placed on the player to interpret whatever they find, because it all just has to exist instead of being introduced to you sequentially in some kind of linear order. And that's for better or for worse, because let's be honest, as much as you might personally enjoy this kind of thing, you have to admit that after a while a certain kind of people really start to push what I'm prepared to deal with. You know, let's equate Bigfoot, yeah, that was just a couple of mods spawned from Easter eggs and rumours, with, let's say, Jeff the Killer. Dunno, jury's still out on that one, I think. The point I'm desperate to make here, however, is that that doesn't mean that rarely there aren't very real, completely valid, justifiable reasons for a myth or rumour to spawn in any game, not just GTA. Because obviously, when you give the player the job of interpreting something, regardless of how obvious you try to make it, someone out there is gonna end up seeing fucking Mothman eventually, especially when they're like 12. And desperate for attention on the internet. Although GTA San Andreas is definitely the perfect example, all things considered, because there really is no other place where the waters have been so muddied. You really have to just wonder that if maybe by some small chance there's a tiny bit of truth to just one of these things. Because, I mean, my heart really does go out to the few people out there that might have genuinely experienced something due to some kind of super rare bug or even an entirely unrelated hardware failure they just ended up attributing to the game. Because then the only option available to them is to enter the online arena and do battle against the same people claiming that, I don't know, they saw like a little fucking green alien walking around Los Santos or some shit. And if you really think about it, imagine how likely and how often that must have happened, with GTA San Andreas being one of the best selling and most widely played games of all time. I think it's very likely. But I am also an idiot, so... I mean, it wouldn't have even been the first time. Just take a look at the Perfect Dark Ghost, for example, that somehow, to everyone's surprise, turned out to be real, being just some really rare bug in a specific version of the game. And who the fuck saw that one coming? I didn't, but that can just happen, apparently. And I think in large part this means so much to me because I was, at one point, one of these people. And look, before I tell this story, I just want to say that it has a very real, rational, disappointing, and anticlimactic ending. So try not to get too into it, but I'll still try and recreate this the best I can. If you've watched this channel before, how I play games should come as no surprise. I can't remember exactly what I was doing, probably sleeping, but I do know, like I have done thousands of times before, I'd left the game on just idle by some lake in one of the small towns just for me to occasionally glance over at and see, to take in the wind and rain noise, the constantly changing days and weather. It's worth saying at this time I was playing it on the 360 and the game had already been out for like what was approaching a decade at this point, and having grown up playing it, as I'm sure you can imagine, I was well aware of all the stories and already well over them at this point. But still, and despite that, what began as a subtle, droning hum that blended so well between the natural game ambience that I only really noticed it once it had stopped, quickly started to morph into speech, then shouts, before muffled, frantic rambling. In all honesty, at the time and in the moment, my reaction to what I was hearing was just really boringly realistic. I wasn't sucked into the game or paralyzed by what I was hearing or anything. In fact, very little of my attention was on the game at all. I'd say I even forgot it was on. There's a consistency to the game's audio, compressed and mixed in a certain way that if it had meant to be in the game, I would have quickly dismissed it as that, having misheard the wind noise, a car, or a distant shouting pedestrian. I never did manage to work out what it was saying, but I could tell by the tone that it had urgency, it was emoting, it was serious and desperate. I had probably only heard it for what was only seconds, but it obviously felt longer than that because I was sat as still as possible trying desperately not to move so I could clearly hear it without making a noise and missing something. But that was it. It stopped and I'd never heard it again, and I was just left to sit there with that little moment playing over and over again in my mind. Needless to say, I didn't sleep and spent the next couple of hours flooding Yahoo Answers looking for anyone who might have had a similar experience. To, guess what, an audience consisting of a combination between "Yeah, alright buddy," and "Oh yeah, that was probably just Herobrine." So as you can imagine, it was like my whole world was flipped upside down. I started looking at everything from a new perspective. I became a much more introspective and spiritual person. Until, like I said, not long after, I realised when it happened again that I had left my speakers powered on and the magnets were picking up distorted radio stations. My point being, there was a rational explanation to what I had experienced, but no one online fucking had. And so, in tribute and honour to that, I guess, I'm making this. Sure, just another Myths and Legends video on the pile, and although there hasn't been one for a while, I'd say there's probably been enough. So the twist here is that I'm gonna make this a sort of definitive, complete archived list consisting of every myth or rumour that is actually either confirmed or has an explanation. So, starting with obviously, throughout this whole thing, I am just going to be humouring a lot more claims than I would ideally like to, but at the same time I'm planning on just giving everyone making them the benefit of the doubt, assuming that you know, for example, the bare minimum it requires to be considered conscious. Like, for example, that planes have a small chance to fly or even crash overhead practically anywhere, or things like the indicator for whether or not you're in a concealed stealth area is CJ's breathing being amplified. Although I'll admit that one is an interesting choice, not sure I personally would have gone with that for literally any other tone than scary, but hey. Because ghosts are by far the most common rumour, literally because everything that isn't anything is a ghost. Which is also why it's the one I've spent the longest time looking into, that and for obvious reasons. So I'm confident I can explain just about everything that has ever been attributed to some kind of spirit in this game. So starting there, the only thing more common than claims of ghosts is claims of ghost sounds. Forest screams, whispers, breathing, disembodied voices. This game definitely has a specific sound. You can absolutely tell from the majority of the descriptions and videos containing them that for the most part they're all actual in-game audio and not, you know, spooky Halloween SFX Volume 1 that some guy plastered together in Windows Movie Maker. Although I could literally be hearing anything in these places and it'd sound horrific because of this game's fucking atmosphere. Let's be real, this is another very big reason why this game in particular has so many rumours surrounding it. But in this case specifically, after looking around, guess what? There's actually a fucking ghost. It's real. There's a famous palette of bugs in this game that most people are aware of by now, but to oversimplify it quickly, through a combination of how the pathfinding works and how you're repositioned when you step out of bounds inside interiors that are usually just suspended above the overworld, occasionally pedestrians can get themselves fucked in between nothing and respawn like a mile above the map, plummeting to their deaths in a nightmare-like scenario that I know I've thought about countless times before. The worst possible place for which being somewhere deep in the woods, in the dark, when it's foggy and you're already like looking for Bigfoot or some shit. Although weirdly, one of the few places not to have an interior above it is the ghost town where most of the supposed sightings claim to be from. Don't get me wrong, it's rare, really rare. I mean, here I couldn't even get it to happen at all while looking anywhere in that general direction. The only way I even knew it's a pedestrian is because of free look mods. But it can potentially happen anywhere, opening up the possibility that it has done in the past because it can. You have to wonder whether that accounts for any visual sightings as well. I mean, it's definitely a way more unlikely scenario, but because of how the pathfinding works, if a pedestrian were to survive the fall, they'd just slowly wander through the woods back to the closest town. But alright, that one might be a bit of a stretch, because outside of that, and maybe just the general catching of a tree in the corner of your eye and thinking it's something else, visually that's about it. There's the ghost cars obviously, including the one that moves on its own. Move is being generous, it's more like a gentle roll if anything, and even then, does it really though? I've always wondered whether or not this was just meant to be like a dig at backwards America, just like a stolen car being abandoned or something, and we just interpreted it that way. The only thing that makes the stationary ghost cars a ghost car is that the default state is all smashed up even if you repair it, but even then, is it that much of a stretch to just imagine that they were meant to be that way? Just for the decoration? And still, does it even really matter? Do I even care if it's supposed to be spooky or not? It's however you personally see it, because that's as much their fault as it is yours, as in making the game this moody and atmospheric, then having that happen. It's like, really, what did you expect? What was the best possible outcome there? But yeah, generally that's a big one there. The passengerless, beaten up car that rolls down the hill in the woods on its own. I'd confidently say that's the one the least likely in need of an explanation. The street art in the cemetery is another example because it's brought up a lot as the ghost Easter egg, but maybe it was just meant to be dynamic to give the environment life. I mean, it uses the same system the randomly assigned shop sign textures use, and that was the point there, to give the environment life. I mean, to be fair, in an equally shit way, but I'm not here to comment on that. But that is a whole other really good point, because to put it in my usual eloquent way, this game is very good. So when you see something like that, obviously, you're just like, no, that can't just be bad. There's got to be a story here. I know, Ghost, which is absolutely the case when it comes to and there really is no better example of that than with Bigfoot, a tale literally as old and iconic as the game itself, with the first rumours being quite easily traced back to within a week of the game's release. Which is insane considering how slowly news travelled back then. We were practically still using carrier pigeon. And even still, considering how new a concept a digital myth was, you can understand why they'd take off now, but back then I'd have thought people would have just not given a shit. But still, they did. Yeah, sure, thanks to a lot of liars and eerily realistic Photoshop jobs. But to put this to rest once and for all, I honestly believe we'd be right in blaming the Bigfoot rumours entirely on the fact that they were just asking for it. Really, let's be honest. I mean, yeah, because of like the footprint, the inclusion of the rural setting, and just the atmosphere in general, but also because of the fact that Rockstar literally asked for it, taking a hard stance against either confirming or denying any rumor spawned from their games as to not ruin any kind of magic. Again, not that that means anything anymore now that the game's data is almost all completely out there at this point, and not that I think that that was a bad decision, because it definitely benefits me because this is the shit I enjoy, but also them because it gets more people talking about their game, I guess. But obviously the effect that was going to have is that it led to the situation we're in today, and that we're in now, where people to this day claim to see fucking Sasquatch lumbering, shambling around in the woods of fucking GTA San Andreas. Despite, and really, needless to say, the fact that they don't. Guess what? It's not real, and that's it. And that's not a secret or really news to anyone, much like the fact that this game is famously not even half the size it was intended to be, having probably one of the most well-known development crunches ever. Sure, it's still huge, but like, the way certain mechanics aren't fully realized and just sort of dumped on you partway through the game, the way the ending literally comes out of nowhere, the way, I don't know, pedestrians literally fall from the fucking sky all over the map. You'd think if filling those holes was a luxury they had, that'd be number one on the list. And I wouldn't be surprised if Bigfoot was just another thing that didn't quite make it. Not even necessarily in the creepy kind of way it went on to become nowadays. Maybe it was even meant to be comedic, or a really standard boring sequence of side missions, like how in GTA 3 there's a bunch of weird shit left over from the cut Dark Hell content. The footprint on the map is a bit weird, but imagine if there was like no mission associated with the military base, for example, or the stories that would spawn. And I mean, some people don't even let that stop them. Oh, case in point, this game's UFO sightings. Flying saucers, aliens, government conspiracies, astral cults, and everything else in between. Naturally, the result of putting in a secret underground military base in a desert modelled on Area 51 was that everyone's imagination took off running. Or did it? But in reality, I think this example specifically is a lot less their fault, seeing as in the same way LA would feel wrong without Hollywood, Nevada would just feel wrong without Area 51. And let's be fair, if you're trying to capture the essence of a literal desert, I mean, you're not swimming in options for content, which is probably why this game of all games did so much in the area of mythical creatures in general, because well, they couldn't do as much with GTA 4, for example, evident by the fact that they did fuck all with GTA 4. Like Bigfoot, the rumours begin and end with what there actually is, though. Just decoration. And again, it's possible that more was planned, the remnants of which can be seen in the weird pedestrians and their dialogue, radio ads, every barbershop employee's outfit, and creepy culty dialogue. Move, Uncle Brother. As for the famous blue-windowed house, though, guys, I think the windows might just be blue. I think we might be looking a bit too deeply into that. The fact that they eventually got to it in GTA 5 would seem to support that, but because it's such a famous thing in this game now, they could have just been referencing the rumours, so we'll never really know. Especially since they put their foot down on ever addressing it. So what is actually here? Well, UFOs for one. Oh yeah, that's right, they're real, by the way. Real in the sense that they are just unidentified. Which, yeah, is a bit of a cop-out, and if I was watching this and some guy pulled that shit, I would not be having any of it, I'd say that much. But again, and to return to the point of this video, if you're 13 and catch that in the very corner of your eye for less than 1 second, what else are you gonna think it is? And then on top of that, it's another really, really rare occurrence, which I think adds everything to it, because like the falling pedestrians, there's next to no video evidence of it it happening, despite how many people play this game. Which also means that every time it's brought up, it's explained in a fucking essay written by a non-native English speaker on some weird-ass forum, leaving a lot of room for interpretation. I mean, to ruin it completely, it's literally just the seam of a certain fog effect clipping into the skybox for like a fraction of a second, although it's a weird coincidence that it only happens with the deserts or mountains skybox, where you'd most likely be looking for UFOs. But that's all it is, and that's all it can be, again assuming obviously that the reported sightings are truthful and that they know those blinking red lights are supposed to be planes. And, well, that they didn't get a good enough look at the black dot in the first place to not assume it was just a bug anyway. Because let's just say you have to be very 13 to jump straight to UFO for some reason. But like I've also said, I'm being very kind while I make this. There are some dumb people out there, don't get me wrong, but you have to know what like a bird looks like in this game, for example, because if that's the level we're on, finger painting might be more your thing. If I were to somehow spin this into a tragedy though, it would be how disappointed I am that the most interesting and, more importantly, actually plausible myths by far are also seemingly the most unheard of. Alongside Bigfoot, not even days after the game's release, screenshots of players encountering a really rare ominous green fog started popping up online and all over forums. Although unlike Bigfoot, making it infinitely more believable, was the context in which it was brought up was always more like a confused person looking for tech support than just some kid who somehow discovered the super secret, incredibly complex method to unlocking Bigfoot. As in, it was always just otherwise trustworthy people asking if it was normal, if they could fix it, if it was supposed to be happening and what they might have done to have caused it. But then, due in large part to everyone just not knowing what was going on, they could only look at, like, just to name a few examples, all the Easter eggs like the bio well heavily implying for some reason that the mass dumping of chemical waste was taking place, then the real in-game mission and associated models in the game's data that seemed to support the theory that chemicals played a larger part in this game than they actually did, which is more than can be said for literally every other myth in this game. The fact that it all takes place in and around the main Sprunk factory, which billboards and vending machines of can be found literally all over the game. I wasn't convinced of some Ben drowned ass paranormal ghost in the machine shit, but I honestly believed it could have just been some rare Easter egg poking fun at the state of American drinking water and junk food standards. And is that not absolutely something Rockstar would do? It wasn't impossible to believe is what I'm saying. It also really isn't impossible to see now from this that it's all only just another bug caused by certain textures and effects not being compatible with the lower bit depths, that were, for some reason and despite that, still available in the graphics menu of the PC version when it launched. Another perfect example, by the way, of how could they possibly have fucked something that basic up. It must be intentional, but they did. And we're still dealing with the fallout today. The infinitely rarer and harder to replicate red fog is the result of just waiting around long enough in the desert for a convenient sandstorm to take place during sunset, then just booking it across the map fast enough for it to not update once you've reached the woods, in what is the smallest window of time you will ever be given for anything. And since I'm also playing the PC version where the atmospheric effects are just kind of fucked in general, in the end I really just had to throw my hands up. But my point's still there. And so, as far as the explanation side of things, that just about summarizes everything. But I've also come to learn that that's by far the worst part. If it's not a bug, it's an Easter egg, and if it's not an Easter egg, it's leftover beta content, and if it's not leftover beta content, it's schizophrenia. And I think deep down everyone knows that, obviously, which is something I really had to force myself to come to terms with while making this. Because, thinking back to the first time I ventured into the woods of this game, specifically in the dark, just to walk around in circles in complete silence for hours in search of whatever happened to have captured my attention online that week, I honestly can't figure out whether or not I was doing it looking for an answer, or whether I even really wanted one, to be honest, or, more importantly, whether even the tiniest part of me even believed there was any truth to any of them in the first place. Because honestly, I doubt I would have really been satisfied if I was to find out it was just a secret unlockable side mission, a bug, or an Easter egg. It's embarrassing and I don't want to admit it, but I'm getting more and more aware of the fact that I don't actually really care. It's dumb and borderline psychotic, but all of what I enjoy about this stuff is in my own head. And I'm definitely not the only one with that, at least. You only have to look at how hostile and dismissive the responses are to anyone simply offering a rational explanation to someone's claim. Because again, no one really wants that. They don't want an answer, they don't want help to solve it, and they don't really believe the stories anyway. It's just a game in itself. So I guess what I'm really saying, if I'm fucking saying anything at this point, is, the real Bigfoot is in the hearts and minds of all the friends we made along the way.